Hi everyone, welcome to the Curious Cutlets podcast. My name's Sumit and I'm based out of Chandigarh. I'm currently an entrepreneur in the pharmaceutical manufacturing domain and therefore interested in the intersection of business, healthcare, biotech, and public policy. Our idea for this podcast is to have a platform to share our opinions and attempt to bring some interesting food for thought for you to leave with. On to you, Anshika.
Hi, my name is Anshika. I'm an international higher education professional with an interest in areas of leadership and nutrition. I have also studied media and communications and journalism and mass communication, and I come with that background.
Awesome. That is interesting. So I think it's only fitting to address the elephant in the room, which is ironically in the opposite of the size of an elephant, and which is COVID-19, which we're all dealing with. Insane times, and this is so unprecedented. Everybody's dealing with it differently. Do you want to begin with how you're dealing with it? What's going on with you? How's that affected your work and life?
Yeah, so basically I work out of an office, and more or less my job is related to traveling nationally and internationally majorly. So we're on the road probably 15 days out of 30 days. And if I have to be honest with you, a lot of our work has halted, but we also have shifted most of our work to the online space. And of course, like any other business trying to understand the situation right now, we also have teething problems. But the idea is just to get everything on work from home basis and trying to sort of make, your colleagues and your business feel like it can run from anywhere in the world from home. I'm curious to understand how it's affecting what you do every day.
I mean, it's amazing to hear that you're at least able to work, because for me, as I mentioned, I'm in the manufacturing space. And for me, it's either you're on site or there's no work for you. So for me, work's been halted for the past 10 days. We were given instructions to not continue running the plant because it was hazardous for the employees, and also it was against the state laws. So we've stopped manufacturing. If there was any way I could manufacture at home, that would have been awesome. But since that's impossible, our work stopped until we have further instructions to begin. That's all about my field of interest and my work, to bring up what you're doing these days now that you're home and how you're spending time.
A large chunk of the day actually goes into working from home. And also, I'm trying to sort of hone my personal skills. So a big learner, online learning is now a big thing right now. So I'm actually trying to inculcate that in my routine, getting reading into this space. So what are you doing these days? Now, this question comes to highlight the very popular dilemma on social media, which people have currently around the pressure of being productive during hard times like these. I'm curious to know what's your take on this.
Honestly, I think I oscillate between the two schools of thought, which I have come across, which is basically to be total alpha, be hyper productive and stuff like that. And the other being that sort of take it easy, heal yourself and stuff like that, which I'm on board with, right? Like, I think it's such a stressful time for everybody. You, me, it's for once, everybody's dealing with the same sort of a phase. They're having the same sort of mental stresses that we've not shared ever. So I think it's interesting, but I think it's important to realize what do you want to be at the end of this? What do you expect to be at the end of this phase? Because you can try and keep achieving everything you want. You can do this, that, and all of those things. But if it's not going to connect to what you want to be at the end of that and where you see yourself after this, I think it's kind of a waste, because it's great to exercise, I think, and I'm trying to infuse that into my day-to-day activities. Not been successful, obviously, but I'm trying to. But I think it's also important to recognize that you need to breathe. You need to spend time with your family, because they're also stressed about themselves, and their relatives around the world. So that's my take on it. I think it's you kind of have to meet in the middle. You kind of have to balance things out. You don't want to go kill yourself over not being extra productive, because I don't think the idea of this is to give the world a holiday to work on themselves. The idea of this is to this is not something that that people are taking voluntarily. So that's what I think.
I agree. I think
do too much. You should also do little. So I think somewhere in the middle is where the equilibrium is.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think as an extension to what you said, I would like to add a few things which I've, recently read, takes for or takes against the topic. So there's some things which, I've read for being productive during this time, which is basically about, people preaching that you don't get this time too often, in 150 years, these are times or these are things that don't happen too often. And this is the time to actually build yourself, hone your skills. In fact, someone also linked it to Bill Gates' thinking week that he takes every year. So he takes like a week off and goes and completely detaches him from all of the external sort of, variants and wants to just think about himself and his personal growth. Now, so I actually do agree with you, Sumit. I also have over this 1 week had the opportunity to look at both the sides of the coin like you have. So there are certain segments, of people who are trying to understand that there are, this time is not going to come back. It's like a very golden time and we should actually work on ourselves and be fit and have a routine and do this and that. Now, again, there's a take against it wherein, this very, very beautiful line which I read that during this time, work from home is not work from home. It's basically you are at home during a crisis trying to work. So this is completely opposite to the idea that we're thinking about being productive. Now, this time is basically, according to this set of people, asking you to just soak in the time that this is, or soak the effect of this pandemic and understand it properly. This article, which is titled "Don't Make Yourself a Project, Why the Pandemic Isn't the Time for Self-Improvement," is something I want to plug in here and say that it's basically trying to highlight the importance of slowing down, thinking about the loss and grief associated with the pandemic, and not go crazy, almost transactional about these fitness routines. So being real and being vulnerable is what this time really wants out of us. And this trauma therapist who I happened to speak with yesterday, she says that there's something called productivity guilt that people are facing these days as a result of this pandemic, that they just really want to be productive.
Absolutely.
But they have so much guilt with that, making them go crazy. We can do both at the micro and the macro level of the crisis can be handled only once we understand what we want to do with ourselves and then slowly gravitate into making it a routine. And then make it a ripple effect in trying to make people understand that have to work through it.
I think you're right. I think it's the same for people and organizations. When people are trying to figure out what works for them in their personal lives, I think organizations are also trying to figure that out. How much of our work can actually be, you can be done remotely, and how much of it should probably be remotely done, because I think at the end of this, there's going to be a lot of realizations on how to function more effectively, and then also in a way that work's actually done and not just FaceTime, not just the idea of being present physically. I think that's very pertinent. I think this is what I'm looking at right now. Just moving away from that, I wanted to ask you, what are you doing currently, like day to day? What's your day schedule like?
Okay, so the bigger chunk of the day is spent working from home. So say about 6 to 8 hours. And I think a lot of it is also spent learning things online. I've enrolled myself into online courses and probably more if I see positive effects of it. And then I'm reading and cooking. And what about you?
That's awesome. That sounds interesting. I am trying to catch up on sleep. That's my bigger chunk of the day. So a very messed up sleep cycle doesn't allow for that as well. But I'm trying to read. I'm trying to catch up on a lot of the news, a lot of the non-COVID news, because I think it's important to get perspective on things on besides this also. And soaking up statistics every day of how many cases can really mess with your mental health. So I think
totally
to step back, be objective about what are they feeding your mind and things like that. I was reading up about how many cases, how many deaths and stuff like that, and I was really psyching myself out at the end of the day.
No, I agree.
Mind sharing, what are those, how are you interested in those, and where are you doing those if anybody wants to follow suit? And
so I actually started them on Coursera, and there's also a website called Skillshare where I registered. They actually provide, like LinkedIn Learning provides short-term courses, but Coursera has a long-term one spread over weeks.
That's amazing. Which brings me to, I know your brother's in the US studying and he's off school because, college and stuff. How is it going for him? He's on ground in the US and, especially in terms of education and stuff like that.
Okay, so that's actually interesting to talk about because it's more or less related to my field. See, right now, be it US or elsewhere in the world, a lot of universities around the world are actually struggling with problems of shifting the entire operation to online because they're not, able to understand how universities which actually function face to face or function on classroom basis have to shift to like a completely online system in less than 48, 72 hours. Now, again, it also brings about, rumors around what kind of universities are willing to shift operations online. There are certain rumors about universities shedding staff and also about understanding, okay, can you deliver classes in the same financial bracket as you're delivering online classes? And do universities or schools have those professional equipments to actually deal with those? Now, that sort of rumors in, my area and my field, and because I talk to my brother, I understand. And I'm sure you're also, hearing, like all of us are, rumors and speculations around this COVID and how it's affecting us.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many that go around, but also seemed real was the Boston Consulting Group actually released a RIP at least like till the end of August, which is, which is crazy to think about. But, if it's in the greater, if it's in the benefit of the greater good, I think governments might have to take those actions. Business as usual cannot happen now.
Yeah.
I think the problem is the reason why we're in this situation is that a lot of action was delayed, a lot of action was ignored, which could have been done earlier. But I guess, I think governments are also at the end of the day made up of individuals who've never experienced something like this. You can't really, you can't really put a finger on what went wrong and why it went wrong. I think people are just trying to work through the new, initial friction of how to make the system work. Apart from this, I think we're hearing obviously about the recessionary trends that have started. We're going into a bear market, and that's a whole separate demon to deal with. So that's the kind of stuff I'm hearing about.
See, of course, adding to what you said, that I'm also hearing stuff about now that we've reached almost 3rd of April and we have approximately 11 days till when the lockdown actually has to be lifted up. We're hearing that IRCTC, the train services are going to resume from 15th of April, and also domestic flights will take turn from 15th of April onwards. So these are speculations that, we are hearing, but, we're also hearing on the other side that as humankind, we would actually come out better learned and better developed out of this pandemic. So are you at this point able to categorize this, that A, that is going to be positive or negative development or sort of, transformation? And B, is it going to be at the level of spirituality, or are we going to be affected physically? Are people going to lose lives, or is it going to be financial? How are you able to grasp your mind around this?
What all I've been reading about is that I feel that we're gonna come out very changed. We're gonna come out of this as very different as a community, as the world. Not, some people are saying it might be for the worse, but I think it's probably going to be for the better in, as a bigger picture, because I feel like now there's going to be a decline in the polarization that we've seen in the world. You're no stranger to the fact that in every walk of life, there's so much polarization. We're in a world where it's extremes. I feel like this common enemy that we're now dealing with is going to bring a lot of brotherhood in people, and, a sense of connectedness. Harmony. That we're all, for the most part, we're more in harmony than we are, estranged. I think that's going to bring about in people, and also less individualism. I think we're already learning to get a hold on. It's not so much about yourself as about affecting another person with the disease that have a problem dealing with. So I think there's a lot of lifestyle, and I think this is I hate to continue take longer than I can. And this professor from Georgetown, professor of linguistics, Deborah Tannen, she was saying that personal will now feel dangerous in the sense that the comfort of being in the of others will be replaced by the comfort of their absence, especially for people you don't really intimately, because we did before this. There's going to be a reason. People will be saying that, is there any good reason to do this in person? And we'll really have to be convinced that there's actually a need to do this in person. Yeah. Which was the other way around earlier. So I think that was super interesting. Also the whole idea of media, digital access, bringing people closer during this time, and in such a great time to be alive, honestly. Because imagine this was, the Spanish flu in 1918, where people didn't have access. At least we're able to keep each other sane. We're able to have this podcast. We're able to keep this live. is a great thing. So that's my take on it. I know you had some very interesting insights into like the more technical experts' opinions. You want to bring that up?
No. I think what you mentioned really caught my attention about the personal being dangerous. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to mention that stems from the book I read last month, which I think I told you on our personal chat as well, that it's by Deepak Chopra. It's called Meta Human. And, when you talk about personal, he actually understands the idea of I being egoistic. So, he talks about how, at the time of crisis like this, for example, you really are going to commit a sin if you only think about yourself. Like, for example, in our case, if we're even trying to put out a podcast at this time, we are in some way trying to will it out to the world that we're all in this together and it's all going to be fine in whatever capacity. Personally, I want exactly what you or probably the other people in the pop culture sphere are actually bringing it out, that we'll come out of this very, very well, and we'll understand a lot of concepts we didn't as people earlier. But there's this concept I stumbled upon only recently, which is called the Hedonic Treadmill. And it's interesting to understand that how it's completely in opposition of our understanding of us coming out very transformatively changed out of this pandemic. So basically the definition is that post a crisis or post a very, very overwhelming stage at human's life, after that, during that time, of course, they are very, very sort of intrigued by that, very overwhelmed by that situation. But post that situation, the level of their feeling, be it happiness or sadness, actually comes back to the baseline from where it started even before that situation hit. So, for example, if we were, happy at a level of 0, at a scale of 0 to 10 before the pandemic, and our happiness actually decreased to -1, we were actually not going to go into positive after the pandemic. We will in fact come back to 0. That's what that Hedonic Treadmill says. And unfortunately for us, it is scientifically proven. So even a personal part of me, and I'm sure you'll also agree, that we would want, and we know for a fact that the world will not be the same after this, but somehow a lot of scientific theories, and especially Hedonic Treadmill, disagrees with that. So I'm having like multiple thoughts around this.
Of course. I mean, I hope that we come out better, but it's really for everybody to see and witness and what, how people are. And I feel like it's really going to depend on person to person, how you view life in general. Because I think people like you and I will probably want to be better after this. Will probably want to be more empathetic after this. But there's obviously going to be a set of people that are so disgruntled from this, they'll probably go back to their routines.
But I want to get your attention to something very interesting that I read recently, and I'm going to read it out to you. This is by Dr. Winston from the USC Annenberg School of Journalism, and it actually brings together or weaves together some interesting concepts that we can discuss to take this forward and proceed towards the end of the podcast. Now, I'll read it out to you. It says, coronavirus is going to be the religion story of our lives. Deep questions about morality, mortality, and metaphysics are going to be a part of every story on this pandemic. Who lives? Who dies? Who gets a ventilator? These are religious questions, ethical questions. We make moral decisions every time we walk out of our house now. Here we're talking about a bunch of stuff. We're talking about class, morality, ethics, law, harmony, like you discussed, culture, economic preferences. And I feel like my mind is going all these places. So I want to understand from you, what sense do you make of this statement?
No, I mean, these are so important, right? Like, because you can't see it as an insular concept. You have to see it as a combination of so many things going on, because that's the society we're living. We're affected by not just one thing. We're affected by class, and we're, morality, ethics, religion is such a big part, and, laws of every state, every country, they can differ. But I think in general, what I can contribute to this is that there's a lot of confusion as to some countries that are letting older people die, right? Like, that's terrible to hear. And I get that. I get that school of thought where they're like, okay, we anyways are unable to. I think, you have to respect a medical professional's diagnosis that, hey, I don't think there's any point now trying to revive this person, because their quality of life is not going to be good anyways after this. So I get that point of view, saying that we'd rather save the individuals who actually can have a good life after this. And you want that. You want to be a little practical about that as well. You can't entirely be emotional in that aspect. So I think that's what I think about, when you're discussing things like who lives, who dies, who gets a ventilator. I think those are practical questions to consider as well. And also it's sad when class comes into the picture, it just becomes a whole
Yeah.
different thing you're dealing with. So I think that's something I would want to hear from you.
I think the beauty of this podcast is that we sort of bring together ideas from different areas and from our different realities, and then there's no one right or wrong opinion. But of course, adding to that, I have a very human sort of a view to that. So I am unable to right now make a sense of, okay, number of ventilators and which country is being allied to which country, and which religion is right, because of course in India, unfortunately, we are seeing that there's a lot of things that have been made about religion at this point, and also about class and stuff. These are very, very important questions which are a byproduct of this pandemic, and again, they give us a chance to grow out of this pandemic stronger.
Absolutely.
However, the only two things I'm thinking about almost on everyday basis is the power of being kind. Every single minute I'm thinking about, I wrote a bunch of letters to a couple of my friends, which I thought I'm going to post to make them feel better. Something so funny happened that this garment store I visited maybe like 5 years ago, and I registered my phone number with them. And I got a call today during my meeting asking if I was okay and if I needed help from them. And this is so unprecedented. That's really cool. I think what Professor Winston actually pointed out are real questions, which maybe, in my opinion, in hindsight, we'll be in a better position to answer. But now, I see the power of kindness and humility and humanity acting up more in this pandemic times more than anything else.
I agree. I mean, you're absolutely right when you're saying that this really opens that window of self, introspection, trying to get a peek into, hey, what are we doing wrong so far? What are we not doing right? That's brought us to a place of where, we're even dealing with these questions. So I agree. I think kindness is so important in times like this, not just for people for people who you don't know, for people who you think you can, help in any sort of way. I think as long as you're being safe yourself, I think those are important things. So I think at the end of this, I think it's important to say that it's going to have to be a balance. It's going to be a sort of equilibrium of how are you maintaining the right social order, but then you're also thinking about how do you want to then go out of this and into a better future, which takes into account economics, which takes into account law, harmony, and things like that, right? And I'd just like to quickly add, I think, because we didn't touch upon before entering into this segment, we didn't touch upon the economic aspect of it, which I think is important, because I really believe that a lot of the social and a lot of the socioeconomic conditions are a product of economic, rules, laws, and stuff like that. Countries will now be very cognizant of maintaining stronger domestic supply chains, because I think if there's anything countries and economies and, I would say even Wall Street has learned is, we're very dependent on countries, especially China, right? And this isn't about a matter of being political. This is just pure facts that every country in some way or the other directly, actually more directly than indirectly, is very dependent upon international supply chains, which again, I think is good to think about now, is how coming out of this, how you're going to fix that. It's probably going to lead to rise in prices in the short term. But I think in the longer term, self-sufficiency is very important for countries to think about, especially in terms of contingency plans. Because this is what, Todd Tucker, who's the director of governance studies at Roosevelt Institute, he was mentioning that countries will have a really big task ahead of them in trying to figure those questions out. Do we have enough to sustain ourselves? Because crisis, as we now can see, can hit us anytime. I feel like there was a sense of complacency that had, come across around the world, that, everybody thought that, hey, this is not going to come to us. This is something that happened in the early 1900s. Clearly not. Right. I think it's really, again, it's been a wake-up call, which I don't know is good or bad, but I think we really need it as human beings. I don't know what you think about that.
It'll ask us to digitally grow up, What is the first thing you'll do once all of this is over?
I am going to want to, I really hope it's over when it's scheduled to be over. And I hope we've dealt with it in a timely manner and there's no need for extensions of these lockdowns. But that's a separate thing. I really want to order just pizza at home, have my friends over, have you over, because I think you'll still be here when, the lockdown ends, and just enjoy the company and just the pleasure of being around friends. Because, just being on Zoom house party doesn't really cut it. If there's anything and this is also I want to add, I think millennials, like people our age, Gen Z, they're gonna now finally appreciate the value of connection, real valuable connection, even physical presence around each other,
face to face,
of your loved ones. That's a special thing, and it feels like a luxury now because you don't have it. So, that's what I'm going to do. What do you think you're going to be doing?
On a serious note, first thing I want to do is have pani puri.
I'm going to come with, honestly.
It's the one thing I'm dying for and I can't wait.
I think this has been great, and I hope this has been an insight for anybody who's listening to this.
I would like to end with saying that, we have to understand that there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel and just be really, really hopeful. Sumit and I, if I can say on his behalf as well, are hopeless optimists. So we always try
I couldn't have put it better myself.
We are always trying to think of the best for firstly everyone else and then ourselves. But I think that's how we have to learn from getting out of any of these situations. But thank you to everyone who's joined and tuned in. This was our episode number 1. We are soon going to be back with episode 2. And if you have any suggestions for any of the topics you're interested in, do tell us in the comment section, or we're also going to put our email ID in the description box and any of the space that's available, so you can write to us. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Awesome. This was great. Bye.